Hello, everybody, and welcome to Wholesale Change, the webcast and podcast from Distribution Strategy Group, where we provide thought leadership for wholesale change agents like you. And if you're on this call, you probably are a wholesale change agent. Now, I want to bring in my business partner, the professor of profit, the doctor of distribution, who just started teaching again at the University of Colorado for this semester, which means he also probably deserves a medal of bravery. Jonathan Bine. How are you, doctor?
Always a pleasure to work with you, Ian. I'm well. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thank you. I also want to bring in one of our guests, a principal also at Distribution Strategy Group. I call him the wizard of the World Wide Web. It's Jason Capshaw. How you doing, my friend?
Good, Ian. Thanks for having me.
Yeah.
It's going to be fun.
Yeah, good. So today's topic is many unhappy returns. And, having worked for 4 big distribution companies, I can tell you I've been in countless discussions about returns. But for the most part, those discussions were not really how to prevent returns at the point where they happen. They're mostly about how do we change our policies to lower the cost of returns, and how are we going to set goals so that we get fewer returns. But it was all based on, data we saw in the income statement. It wasn't about what can we actually do to affect a lower rate of return. And so there's a lot of literature out there, and some of it I think is discussed pretty commonly. I think some of it's really not talked about at all, or at least not very much. So let's jump into the discussion. And if you look at the damage that returns do, it's really extensive, and I think most distributors understand this. I won't spend a lot of time on it, but you got the lost sales, right? You're refunding 100% of the sale price. You've got damaged or unusable product. You got all these costs because there's all this stuff that you have to do to process a return. So you've got to receive it, unpack it, inspect it, credit it, restock it, resell it, in many cases dispose of the product. And then, and also, by the way, which is not on this page, you've also probably replenished that product already. So you've got excess working capital. So if you do put it back in stock, you've got more inventory than you need. And working capital management obviously is a big part of a distributor's profitability. And you've got angry customers. It costs 7 times more to acquire a new customer than to sell the same amount to an existing customer. And then more and more you've got reputational damage because people are they're talking you down on social media, and there's word of mouth damage as well. And the reality is it's all bad when someone returns a product.
What I wonder, Ian, is I wonder if the acquisition costs in the B2B world is higher than that 7x. Is that a consumer number?
Yeah.
Okay, so that'd be like if Verizon loses you as a mobile customer, it's 7x for them to acquire a new customer to replace you.
Yeah, it's probably higher in B2B. I couldn't find a data point. Do you know? Do you have one?
Fair enough, but it just seems intuitively like it would be higher in B2B than it would be in consumer.
I think that's true because in B2B you have much higher customer lifetime value, right?
Right.
I mean, your accounts buy from you for years in much greater volumes than most, consumer purchases.
So you're saying that the acquisition cost would be proportional to the customer lifetime value and therefore larger?
I think so because, I think they're related. Yeah, I think they're correlated. Do you?
Makes sense. Yep.
But I also think that that's not even the right lens to view this through. I think that's the lens that most distributors view it through, but I don't think it's the right lens because I think it's a customer experience problem. It's extremely frustrating. And I think it's even worse in B2B. I mean, look, if I order a jacket and, it doesn't fit and I send it back, that's a minor inconvenience in my day, right? If I'm a manufacturer and I order, something that I need for my production line or to, keep my plant operating and safe, and it comes in and it's the wrong item, that's a huge operating problem. So, business to business shopping is not recreational. I mean, if you do have someone shopping recreationally for you, you should fire them, right? Because in B2B, it's all about, shopping in a way that supports your operations. And so if you get the wrong thing, or if you don't like the thing that you got, or it's not what you expected, then that's potentially a serious financial problem for you. And what I tell distributors is, look, you got to own the problem. It's not, you can't, and I see a lot of debate sometimes between manufacturers and distributors where they're trying to toss the hot potato back and forth. It's like, well, the customer returned the product. Well, it's a perfectly good product, the manufacturer says. And the distributor says, well, I don't care if it was supposed to be a perfectly good product. It didn't, the customer returned it. Therefore, it must not have met their needs. And they haggle over this return. So a lot of manufacturers will throw up their hands and just say, well, here's your return allowance. But I think that leads to lazy analysis of the problem and a really poor attempt at solving it. I also think, returns policies are driven by your competition because, it's getting easier and easier to return when you buy from other sources. You had an Amazon return recently, Jonathan, right?
Yeah, I've actually had a couple, and the longest part of the experience was waiting in line at UPS, which took about 30 seconds. And then when I got to the front of the line, I gave the guy the package and I gave him the slip, and that took 10 seconds, and I was done. I bought a printer, which is kind of a bulky thing.
Yeah.
But it was just astoundingly easy to do a return there. It couldn't have been easier.
Yeah. And that sets expectations, right? I mean,
that's the bar. Look, we've seen Amazon setting all kinds of expectations for us, right? In a sense, a lot of the rest of the world is where Amazon was 10 years ago.
Right.
They're that far ahead of the rest of the competition.
Right.
Yeah, one of the things I find fascinating about Amazon is just all these sort of sub-cultures and sub-industries that have popped up. And so, obviously I've never worked at Amazon. I don't know what's going on behind the scenes, but I do know that you can go to this auction website and essentially buy returns. And it's, they deliver them to you by the pallet. And there's a whole industry of folks who buy those, they bid on them, and then they try to resell the merchandise. And what's interesting about it is even if something is brand new and in the packaging and it's very obvious it's never been opened, Amazon will not resell it. So I don't know what their arrangements are with manufacturers, but at least a good portion of their returns end up in this sort of wholesaler type of market, resale market.
Hey, Jason, when I was doing research for this episode, I ran into several people who claim that the return rate of online purchases is 3x that of in-store purchases. Now, again, most of the research around this is in retail, which just mystifies me since distribution's a bigger market. But more people are familiar with retail, so I guess they research it more. But do you have any numbers around that, or is that your experience based on your sort of your gut, having worked with a lot of distributors? Yeah,
so anecdotally, I would say that we are that absolutely, especially on retail side. I think you see it on the B2B side as well. And it really depends on the type of product, right? Because if it's a specified material and there's great product data, that's less likely to happen. But, whenever it's not really clear, this is anecdotal, but I ordered a part for my wash machine, trying to be a handyman. And there was very little data on the manufacturer's website. And, I got the part in, wrong part, right? So I had to turn around and ship it back and buy something else. And if they would have just put a little more effort in the upfront to help me distinguish that, probably that return would not have happened. However, I guess, you can make the case that professionals are going to know what they need, but we both know people make mistakes. So, I don't really know where to fall there.
No matter how expert the customer is, you still have to have the data. And I think, what I don't like is some distributors, not all, but some distributors, they kind of throw up their hands and it's like, well, there's nothing I can do about it. Customers are going to be customers and they're going to return a certain amount of stuff. And I just think it's like they're caving in without taking ownership of the problem. Your mic's a little loud, Jason, so I just don't want the viewers to get blown away by your booming radio voice that makes the rest of the sound bad.
Okay, I'll talk quieter. Sorry about that.
So let's start talking about like stuff you can do to prevent returns. And so I want to go through this stuff that you can find in research if you look for it. Oops, and then I'm giving away the end. And then I want to also talk about some stuff that I think is less commonly referred to that's just as important. So first of all, I think you have to say, look, this is a customer issue. Hold on. So you want to proactively prevent returns, right? So, there's a whole list of things you can do to make sure that customers are buying the right things, right? So, what do you guys think? Take a look at this list and let's go down it. Extensive product data and FAQs. You guys have some thoughts on that?
Yeah, solve the problem before it happens, right? If you're you know, and the way that I view product data, and we had a great, I mean, I got so much from that session you guys did with Jason Hine over at Bloomberg. That was really good. The last episode. Bloomreach, my bad. Yeah, so I read a Bloomberg article this morning. Bloomreach, yes, those guys were great. But in my mind, you know, this is essentially a representation of what a customer would need if they're standing in person in front of someone. You need to have the same amount of data available for that person to make that buying decision. And if you're not closing that gap and answering their questions, it is likely they could buy the wrong thing very easily.
Well, I also think it goes back to this idea we've talked about before. It's not a new idea that it is said about some large distributors that when they answer the phone, they say, what part number? And then when you think about distributors that have more expertise, they're actually helping you figure out what part to buy. So, so I think that this is related to the what part number thing and the helping you figure out what to buy. It's harder to do online. Ian, you've spoken about where Amazon is trying to be the product expert on everything.
Yeah.
But this problem of getting the right product, you know, it's much easier in an offline world.
Yeah, I've also talked about how Amazon's trying to drive more orders through Alexa, right? Because if the order's based on, you know, taking an image of something or a voice description, then they have this competitive advantage because they're the only ones that have a smart speaker hooked up to the world's largest marketplace. But I read their return policy this morning. They actually have a more generous return policy on Alexa ordered products. So they have incentives to drive purchases through the Alexa channel. So and the difference is it's basically freight. If you buy anything on Alexa, they'll refund your entire purchase, including freight, immediately, rather than make you apply for the freight refund or beyond a certain point in other channels. So it's just a lower hassle return if you buy on Alexa. Isn't that interesting? I had no idea until I started looking for that.
Well, they must be betting on themselves that they're going to get better, that the Alexa experience of buying the right product is going to get better over time.
And better than people can pick on their own.
Better than people can pick on their own, right?
Right. So anyway, so I think, so you've got to have great product data. I think lots of FAQs as well. And what I find annoying is that a lot of people will not include FAQs if it might identify a limitation for the product. So, you know, does your product do X? The answer is no. Okay, well, let's not put that on the FAQs because we don't want to discourage anyone from buying the product. And, you know, you really have to have FAQs that are comprehensive because it does so much damage to your reputation. You don't just lose the sale, you lose a customer. I think you need multiple detailed images and videos, right? And so there are various companies out there that will take these, you know, 3-dimensional images where you can spin the product and stuff. I think that's important. I think generally speaking, if you're doing anything to try to get the sale by not sharing negative information or limitations, you're just doing more harm than good. Just be honest about your product. I think you've got to collect reviews. And so I looked it up. That company that you recommended to me years ago, Jason, is still around. It's called Bazaar Voice. And it's Bazaar, Bazaar. So it's like the Bazaar place where everybody comes to shop in a small neighborhood, right? And so Bazaar Voice and others, they have a lot.
Not the adjective.
Correct. Yeah, that's right. See, now not the adjective. And so what they do is they'll aggregate reviews like from the manufacturer and I assume other sources, and then put them on your site.
Yes, and they provide a great mechanism for collecting those reviews, right? And so you don't have to share the reviews that you get from your own customers with other distributors if you don't want to, but you certainly it gives you a mechanism for people to be able to give you feedback. And one of the things that Amazon has done as well on the FAQ side is that they've allowed both verified purchasers as well as manufacturers to answer customer questions right on the product page. And I can't tell you how many times I'm looking at a product and I'm deciding whether or not I'm going to buy it. I'm going to scroll down to that, not just the reviews, but you're right on the money. Like I want to know ahead of time, and I appreciate this. I want to know ahead of time whether or not this is going to meet my need, and giving a mechanism for your customers to be able to review, to be able to ask questions. It's invaluable, and at this point, it's almost the barrier to entry, right? You almost have to do this in certain markets if you're going to compete.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I mean, I think, reviews have replaced inspecting the product in person, right? So it used to be you'd have to look at it in person to have any confidence in it. Now it's like, well, 500 other people liked it. I'm confident that it's pretty good. Offering live chat. I have to tell you, I hate live chat that's powered by AI right now. As much as I talk about AI, it's not ready to interact with people. And you can tell in a second if it's a real person or not. And holy cow, is it frustrating if it's like you have to ask 10 questions and then they say, let me put you in touch with a human being. You're like, oh, for heaven's sake, right?
Well, yeah, our complaint about live chat prior to AI was that you got a warm body on the other side of the live chat.
Right.
And this actually went even,
Got
less
worse.
warm body. This is
Right.
even worse than that live body
Right.
now.
Yeah. We used to talk to people you thought were not competent. Now you're talking to a system that really can't interact with you in any effective way at all. And it becomes this cost savings thing, but it's just frustrating. I mean, if you're going to have live chat about product selection, it has to be a real person, in my opinion, or choose another method to deliver that information. Because if it's on live chat, it's working off of some kind of database of answers. Just make that available. Don't fake like it's a human being. Okay. And then improving picking operations. I mean, distributors pick the wrong stuff sometimes. A lot of times it's a unit of quantity thing. This has happened to me numerous times. And, I had XM radio send me 6 radios one time instead of 1, and Amazon sent me 2 printers, and they're good at picking and packing and shipping, but they sent me 2 printers. I called them back and said, you sent 2? And they said, just keep it. So I have this extra printer. I've never used it in my closet. And then improving the packaging, because a lot of stuff gets damaged in transit, although I think the world's getting better at this. And then the last one, which I think people don't take into account very often, is the more accurate your delivery info, the fewer returns you're going to get, because people got something too late and then they went and bought it somewhere else. And by the time your package came in, they just want to return it. Okay. I want to talk about something that I don't think a lot of distributors do. And I think this is really important. So this was invented by a guy at Grainger named Mark Bischoff when I was there. And so, I've been in countless executive meetings with distributors, and returns are a line on the bottom of your P&L, right? It's just a line. And no, there's very little discussion in most situations about how to reduce this. Like I said earlier, people just throw up their hands. Well, Mark didn't like that one bit, right? So he created this policy, or this process, it's process, not a policy, where we would start tracking a lot of data elements about every return, right? So we look at the brand and the SKU, we look at what channel it was bought through, we, note the condition, use damage, et cetera. And most importantly, we look at the customer reason for return. And what Mark did is he started using Pareto analysis to identify the most common underlying causes for returns, and he tackled them in order. So this is absolutely no different than what a manufacturer would do to Pareto any issue in production, or they do this for their returns and for warranty claims as well, right? So this is a really smart thing to do. And there are probably other distributors that have done it, but I've never run into one since I left Grainger a million years ago, right? And so they were literally, they put in place this process at the branches where every branch would track all of this data, and then we'd have this report, and it would say, well, here are the products that are being returned, and here are the channels that they're being returned through, or that they were purchased from, and here was the customer's reason for the return. And once you have that data, you have to own the problem, even if you feel like it wasn't your fault. Okay. So let me give you an example. Any questions before I do, guys? I'm pattering on here. Okay. So we had, one of the things Mark identified is we had an air compressor. It was manufactured by Campbell Hausfeld, sold under the Speed Air private label name. I can remember the SKU was a 3Z355. How about that? But this air compressor was getting returned at an extraordinary rate. Now, this is a very expensive item, hundreds of dollars for this air compressor. And we were getting a whole bunch of returns. So Mark started looking into it. And the problem was that people were plugging it in without putting oil in it. Okay, so you get this big box, there's an air compressor in it, and there's a plug in it. What do? You take it out of the box and you plug it in. Well, you're not allowed by OSHA to ship them with oil in them. You can't do that, right? So, the first step was, well, let's put a quart of oil in the box so that people would get get the point and put oil in it. That didn't work either. And so we got in these really, knockdown, drag out fights with the manufacturer, because from their perspective, they're like, hey, we're sending you perfectly good compressors. There's nothing wrong with them. And then your customers are plugging them in and destroying them because they can't run without oil, just like an engine can't run without oil. And our perspective was, look, not our fault our customers are doing this. They're not dumb. It's just, they're just not making the connection that when you get the compressor in, you can't just plug it into the wall. You have to do something to it first. So we're going back and forth and back and forth. And at first, that problem took the normal path of, okay, who's going to accept which portion of the loss, right? So how much is the manufacturer going to write off, and how much are we going to write off? Because that's usually how those discussions get settled between distributors and manufacturers. Instead, we got a group of people together. When I say we, I'm talking about Mark and company. I just watched this process. I wasn't part of it. And what they did is they started talking about, okay, how do we prevent this problem from occurring? And so what they wound up doing is they wound up getting a big long piece of super sticky yellow tape, and it on English on one side and in Spanish on the other, it said, add oil before plugging into the wall or before plugging in. And it was a lot of work to remove that tape. It was super sticky, okay? But our returns after that went down to our normal level of returns. And there were hundreds and hundreds of compressors that we sold that would have been ruined and returned and credited and restocked and written off, that were instead happily pumping away in customers' facilities, happily ever after. And that, that notion of, look, we're not going to point our finger at the customer. We're not going to point our finger at the manufacturer. We're going to take ownership of the problem. That's what I thought was so different about that. And I think that's what the thing that Mark did that was very powerful. And it took what seemed like this intractable problem and brought a solution to it that made everybody win. Because, by the way, when you tell the customer, hey, you plugged in without oil, they feel dumb, right? Because then they're like, face palm, I shouldn't have done that. But they still want their money back because they also feel duped, right? So if you're in a situation where you're making your customers feel dumb and duped, you got a problem. And so what wound up happening is we solved that problem and everybody won. The manufacturer won, we won, and customers won. And Mark was the first person who said, we're not going to argue with the manufacturer. We're going to solve the underlying problem. And so what happened over time is our return rates just came down because Mark so aggressively drove this process of doing a Pareto on every single return. Does that make sense?
That is an incredible story. I have to admit, Ian, at the risk of sounding dumb, I actually am one of those offenders, not with a compressor, but I actually had that exact experience and when I say it out loud, I'm like, wow, that was dumb. But I bought a lawnmower, right? Put gas in it, went to crank it up, immediately burned up the engine. Bought it from Home Depot, took it back and talked to the associate. He's like, yes, this has happened repeatedly with this lawnmower, which is why this manufacturer includes this packaging and this, it won't let you even crank the lawnmower unless you've gotten the message that, hey, dummy, put some oil in here, right? So, but I can totally identify with that on a personal level. But that, to me, this, a data-driven solution, whether it's digital, whether it's returns, like a data-driven solution to find the problem, own the problem, and address it. That to me seems like really everybody should be doing this, right? And even if you can't do it on all your returns, you could certainly, like you said, look at your top and just start there and see where you fall with it. Because I'm certain if you're seeing a pattern, there's a reason that pattern is happening.
Well, it's one of the fundamental assumptions behind Six Sigma in particular is that, if things keep happening over and over again, you can't just chalk it up to chance. It's like, there's a reason that's happening and you have to fix the underlying reason. And I bet you that if, Home Depot talked to that lawnmower manufacturer, they could do something like, you have to release a tab to pull the handle, or, the handle's locked in place and it's locked in place across the oil cap, and you gotta add oil before you can do the pull start. And, so I just feel like there's this, avoidance of the real issue because people don't know what to do. But if you start with the assumption that you can always do something, we're not going to be victims of our return process. We're going to be proactive owners of it. And we're going to put in place the analytics to understand what's happening and take steps to reduce them. That doesn't mean you're ever going to get your returns to zero. Of course not. People buy the wrong stuff sometimes, or they don't need it after they thought they did. But I bet you can cut your returns rate by, I don't know, 30, 40%, maybe more, by just taking ownership of it. And you think about like how hard you work to get that sale, right? I mean, you pick the inventory, you order it, you put it away, you went through the whole transaction process, and all that gets thrown away because of what's often an avoidable problem. And I think it's absolutely essential that distributors take ownership of that problem, and they not assume, or they don't accept that it's not their fault, because it doesn't matter really whose fault they are. They don't need to think about it as their fault. They need to think about it as their problem to solve. Fair enough.
Well, let me ask you this, Ian. Oh, go ahead, John.
Who's Jason? Go ahead. Oh, go ahead. So yeah, I mean, to the extent that it is not a true defect from the manufacturer, then it really is the distributor's problem to handle, and it really is a reflection on the distributor, right?
Yeah, and when was the last time you bought something new that just didn't work, and that wasn't user error? I mean, Lean Six Sigma means that the open the box quality is so high now that it's very rare that you get a defective product. I mean, when I was a kid, it seemed like we spent every time we opened our birthday or Christmas presents, we spent the next hour or 2 or 3 trying to make them work because there was something wrong with a lot of them. You just don't see that anymore, right? I mean, it's just not, stuff comes in and it works. So if it doesn't work, it's usually user error, or you ordered the wrong thing.
You clearly never got a puppy for Christmas.
Or a drum kit.
Or a drum kit.
2 things you should never give people's kids.
Yeah.
All right. Well, that's actually all I had today. You guys want to add anything to it?
I mean, I wanted to ask this question, Ian, around just consumables and being willing to take back like over purchases that some Home Depot does. Right. Is there a strategy for growing your market share by, number one, having like a really easy return policy, and number two, by providing some reassurances to the customer? Like even if the manufacturer isn't shouldering that load, do you think it's still a worthwhile investment to create those sorts of policies?
I think that if you're in sales and marketing, you believe that that having a liberal return policy is a good idea and it will lead to increased sales. I think if you're in finance or general management, that looks like a sketchy proposition to you, because you really can't prove the return. And so I think, does it make sense from a customer perspective? Yes. Can you measure the benefit? Probably not. I think that's why these things tend to be guided by competitors. So if your competitors have a liberal return policy, you're sort of pushed into it. And I don't think having unlimited returns is a smart idea. I mean, I just don't think, I think it sounds great. I just think you can't afford it. And so I think you should have a sensible return policy that allows for discretion from certain people, like managers, who can override it.
We've actually measured this, Ian, in some of the end customer research we've done on behalf of distributors.
Okay.
And the preference or the need or desire for a really liberal returns policy varies by customer base. It's not a given that every customer base says, oh, we must have, this completely liberal, no questions asked, anything, anytime returns policy. It does vary, and so that can be measured. And so I think along with this analytic approach, the Pareto analysis, leveraging the ideas that Mark Bischoff put in place at Grainger, I think it's also worth finding out from your customers how relevant it is for them.
I agree. I still think it's driven by, I think you're absolutely right. I think it's largely driven by competition as well. It's kind of like, when American Airlines introduced the frequent flyer program, or whatever they called it at the time, that was a differentiated way of getting people to fly on American. Now everybody does it. And so it's just a cost to the industry because it wasn't really a sustainable point of differentiation. And I think, but the reality is that as bad as it is to have really, really smart competitors, it can be just as bad to have really dumb ones. And if you have a robust competitor who makes a dumb decision, right, like unlimited returns, no questions asked. I'm not saying it's unfair for me to call it dumb, but a really a customer generous decision. You're going to have to, comply or do something, at least reasonably in the same ballpark at some point in time.
Fair enough.
So just to kind of follow up on that, do you think people should, or do you think companies should try to match what Amazon is doing, or should they identify competition as something other than sort of these mega players like Home Depot and Amazon? But like, how would you identify your competition in that and really try? Because obviously, like you said, from the marketing and sales side, we're always looking for customer experience, and we're wanting to make that as great as it can possibly be. And sometimes we don't think about the financials like we should. But yeah, I mean, just where do you sort of benchmark that, Ian?
Yeah, I mean, I think the big players tend to define that. I think as a distributor, you're not going to be able to go out and negotiate with Kohl's to take your returns, right? But then again, you're more likely to have your own physical locations. I think, I don't think you should strive to have the most generous or the least or the most stingy returns process. I think you need one that's reasonable and defensible. And I think that, if you read Amazon's return policy, it's mostly 30 days with some exceptions. Their house brands, I think, are a year. Because they're trying to push that like they are the Alexa ordered products. So, I think if you look at their policy, it's pretty reasonable. And so I think you could match them without, doing yourself any harm. I mean, it's not unusual to have a lifetime warranty on private label brands, because you have such higher margin built into them. So, I think in the case of Amazon or Walmart, you can probably sort of go with what they're going with. What you will be hard pressed to manage is the ease of the return. Because, Jonathan, when you return that product to the UPS store or whatever it was, you didn't need a return goods authorization, right? You just walked in.
I had to print out a label. So I
Okay.
filed something on Amazon that said, I want to return this. They said, great, send me an email. Here's a label. It had a barcode. I printed it out. I took it to the UPS.
Okay. Kind of the same thing, right?
Yeah.
Right. So I think it's a good question, but I think, you scan your market, and I think my whole point of this is the policy is much less important than the process, because if you can prevent a wrong sale to begin with, then you don't have to worry about your policy. And so I think, and by the way, working with distributors, I spent 100 times more time talking about policies and talking about, how much it's costing us than I have actually talking about putting in place processes to prevent returns to begin with. And I've tried to raise this issue, but for some, it worked at Grainger, one of the best operators in the world, but for some reason, distributors are so focused on managing it with policy rather than prevention that they just can't seem to get their heads around it. And I think it's a huge mistake. And it's an area where you can not only, save yourself money, but it's a differentiator, right? I mean, if you're doing all that stuff really well, you probably have a great website with great product data and a satisfying purchasing experience. And people like the fact that they can buy from you because they can find what they need. I mean, there is no end to the benefits of getting the process right. And there's a lot of damage to be done by getting the policy wrong. Okay. Anything else, gents?
We're good.
All right, good. Well, we
Good.
never take
Thank
this
you,
show.
guys.
We never artificially extend the length of this show. Oops, we just make it as long as it needs to be. So we are a distribution strategy group. We offer consulting, analysis, and business intelligence. There's the contact information for Jonathan and me to the left. I didn't put Jason's on, sorry. But if you want to reach Jason, send me a note. I'll forward it to him. We're doing a big series with the National Association of Wholesaler Distributors. So Jonathan and I are doing this. He's doing the research. I'm doing the writing. We just released our second report, and it's Distributors' Views on Technology Disruption and How to Respond. This is research-based. So we did a survey of a whole bunch of distribution leaders about things, topics like blockchain, artificial intelligence, additive manufacturing, a la 3D printing, et cetera, AKA 3D printing, et cetera. And this is a 20-page research report that we wrote. And there's also a webinar that's been archived. This is free. It's super valuable. It's updated information. It's the second one in the series. We've got 5 more coming. If you go to this URL, you can not only download this material or view it for free, but you can sign up for future reports. So the next one that'll be coming out in a few weeks here is how distributor customers view this disruptive technology. So we're right now interviewing customers of distributors and asking them how their expectations of distributors are going to change based on the introduction of technologies like artificial intelligence and a series of other technologies, all of which are identified in these reports. It's it's really important stuff, and I strongly encourage you to take a look at the data.
It's generated some pretty amazing insights. I think just
yeah,
relative to what we expected before we embarked on this research, Ian, right?
yeah.
We had a low expectation of where distributors were deploying this advanced technology and AI. And we were really pleasantly surprised at where companies are on the technology adoption lifecycle, and that's covered in the report.
Yeah, certainly the technology leaders in the industry are speaking loudly and taking strong action to incorporate this stuff, and they we include a lot of verbatim comments from them in the report. So I would strongly advise you take a look at this. I've had several people reach out and say, hey, we sat down with our management team and watched the webinar, or we went through the report, and there's 2 down, 5 more coming, and they're sponsored by SAP and Connexium and Unilog and upcoming Pros, the pricing company. And am I leaving anybody out there? I think that's all.
Miracle,
the marketplace company. So that's a good catch. Very important. So these are some of the leading technology companies in the world, and they've seen fit to help us get this work done by financing it. So that's it for today's show. Jonathan, great working with you as always. Jason, thanks for coming on as a guest at the last minute, really. We appreciate that very much. We'll see you next week on Wholesale Change, and have a great week, and we'll talk to you very soon. Come see us at distributionstrategy.com. Thank you.